Yeah. Yeah. So you got on the bus to Selma.
Got on the bus to Selma, and that was exciting. We got into Selma rather late, but we were able to get into a restaurant. They found places for all of us to sit. We couldn't always sit together because there were too many of us, but that way. So then we got settled into our Holiday Inn Express. We stayed in Holiday Inn Expresses the whole time. We settled in, and then the next morning we were going to the museum in Selma that traces all of the things that have happened in Selma, all of the forces, the women that were championing and advocating and taking huge risks. And of course, this is where our friend, your friend, and my friend Gene Hardy grew up in Selma. So this was and he's been back a number of times, and
share a little bit of his story, because it's just, it really is a wonderful story.
It is. Well, Gene went to the University of Alabama, then went into the Navy, married somebody from Toledo, came back to Toledo. But he was a product of Selma, Alabama. He's a year younger than I am. And so he didn't know any more than I did. Living in the South, I mean, he had no bad feelings. He just didn't go to school with blacks. He said, my playmates were black until I went to school. Then they went one way and I went the other.
Right, right.
The best part of the story is his mother, when Gene was 12, his mother hired Sadie. She was 16, and she hired Sadie to be her helper, to help cook, to help clean, and she taught Sadie all kinds of wonderful things, flower arranging and all kinds of wonderful things. And the best part, she paid Social Security for Sadie for 45 years. I doubt that there's anybody else in Selma that would have been that generous. Usually you pay them under the table.
Yeah. Sadie
now, to this day, at age 89, she has a pension. She has Social Security, and so Gene has kept in touch with Sadie, and Gene said Sadie was part of our family. And I'm certain that when his parents died, I'm fairly certain they probably left her something.
Yeah.
And they were wonderful, wonderful people, but they were Southerners. They only knew what they knew, just the way I only knew what I knew.
Yeah. And Selma back in the day, back at that time, was really a thriving town in many ways.
Well, Gene said when he was there, he pointed out all the wonderful places. And now, of course, it's anything but.
Yeah.
And so after we went to this museum, then we went downtown. And of course, in the meantime, just a little sidebar, Sadie's granddaughter brought Sadie over to the Holiday Inn Express. Gene met her, but watching them hug made me cry. And then they went in and had breakfast, and we went on to the museum, and then he joined us in a little while. So that was really special. So we walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. First, we went to this building that had all sorts of exhibits and materials to look at. And then we actually walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And Gene looked down. I was walking with him. He said, I used to water ski on this river. This was him. This was his hometown.
Wow.
And I said, Gene, think about it. Because as we were walking across the bridge, people of color were coming our way, and we'd say good morning, or good afternoon.
Right, right.
And I said, imagine, Gene, this could not have happened in your childhood. They would have had to step off the sidewalk.
That's right. Right. Were you thinking, so you were crossing the bridge, were you thinking about that Bloody Sunday in 1965?
Oh, I was thinking about
one of John Lewis and Hosea Williams. And I had forgotten that they, I think, left from Atlanta that weekend, and Martin Luther King decided to stay behind with his congregation in Atlanta. He was going to catch up to them the next day. They had actually marched rather peacefully, as I understand it, through downtown Selma, but it wasn't until they crossed over the bridge,
heading to Montgomery,
that they saw the authorities on the other side, who obviously were instructed by Governor Wallace to do, use whatever means necessary.
If you have to kill them, right?
But I think it's important to emphasize and remind people that one of the main reasons for the protest in the first place was to ensure that blacks had voting rights.
Exactly.
And even though the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had been passed, which was going to give them voting rights, there were a lot of places that still weren't allowing that to happen. Selma, I want to say, and I'm the statistics I don't remember, but I think Selma was at that time about 50% Black, but only 2% of the voting population, despite the fact that they should have had that right to vote. So that's part of what they were protesting. They were going to make the march to Montgomery, which is about 50 plus miles to Montgomery, to protest that on the state capitol.
Right. Well, and one of the things that was pointed out to us, when the voting rights was passed, the Blacks got word, and they were all excited, and they were all gathered to go and vote. Now they could only go in the door that said Blacks only into the building, and we saw that building. Well, what happened whenever the white people in the building saw them heading for the building to sign up to vote, they would lock the door. And so they couldn't get in. But then we saw any number of examples of, well, you can vote if you can tell me how many jelly beans are in this jar. And, it's a great big jar full of jelly. Or I mean, that's just one example.
We saw that in the Legacy Museum,
so many attempts to make sure they couldn't vote.
Yeah.
And, in a way, we're seeing a little variation of that now, but not to that extent. So, okay, so then we left Selma and headed for Montgomery. And by this time, we were completely immersed in this Southern history, in this civil rights history. And when we got to Montgomery, we knew that we wanted to go to the Bryan Stevenson's lynching exhibit.
The Legacy Museum, and then the National Monument.
Right, the National Monument. But we didn't know much about the Legacy Museum. And Antonia said, no, we've got to go to the Legacy Museum first. She said, that is huge part of the story. Well, she was so right. I mean, it was the kind of place that you couldn't believe yourself. I mean, when you went in, on either side, there were like clay bodies, heads and shoulders coming out of the ground of every kind of child, adult, old person, young person, on both sides of the walkway, representing the Blacks that have been killed.
Yeah.
And then you walk through, and there were, you can do so much with holograms or technology. They would have a booth, and it would look like there was a real person in it, a Black person begging to be listened to, or it was just gut wrenching. It was just almost more than you can intake.
Well, you know that we've visited there as well. Jan and I have. And one of the things about the Legacy Museum that was particularly moving is the 800 jars of soil that they've had collected from 800 different people that were lynched around the country, that are displayed on that one wall. You stop and you think about that, and then you find out some of the reasons why some of these people were lynched. And
unbelievable.
It's horrible. I just can't. I can't even imagine.
No, and that is my abiding message to myself and others. Do we each have within us the ability to be that cruel? I mean, what made those people think that watching a lynching was like a picnic? What made people, and these are people that were church people. I mean, the Christian church in the South said, go for it. They didn't argue with that at all. I mean, several churches. I've read lots about that. It's a shameful thing. I mean, it hardly comports with Christianity, but at that time, that's the way they saw it. And so I say to myself, do each of us have inside of us a kernel of that kind of evil that we have to keep under wraps? Or is there something, have we learned enough that we could never go there? I don't know.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
But it was a huge, I'm forever changed by it. I didn't learn anything that everything I've read just reinforced it. But seeing it in living color just made it that much more impressive.
So then you leave the Legacy Museum and you go to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which is the lynchings and the big metal or the big steel beams and whatever.
With all the names on all of and there were some from Ohio. Most of them were from the South, but there was one from Ohio with names on it. And these are people that were lynched for no reason at all.
Yeah, they list it by county. And I heard Bryan Stevenson say that they designed it a certain way on purpose So when you initially start, you're looking at these, they almost look like caskets or tombs up on end,
Right.
and they're
Right.
about 6 feet tall. He said they
Right.
they really wanted to give people perspective. But
Right.
then as you start to go into the memorial, you walk downhill,
Right.
and all of a
Right.
sudden these are hanging
They're
up above
above you.
you as if someone has been lynched. But he
Right.
said he found a pastor in there one day who'd literally been sitting there for a couple hours, and he said, "Is everything okay?" And the man said, "I'm a pastor at home, and I just saw the county that I'm from, that I live in and preach in, and with a listing of people that were lynched in that county." And he said, "I don't know how to, I don't know what I'm supposed to say when I go back
Right.
about that, but I feel awful."
Yeah. But
just
that's
very
history. And we have to, instead of beating ourselves up, we have to remember to never have it happen again. In other words,
That's
we
right.
have to learn from that. If we don't evolve as people and recognize evil when we see it, then we're absent. We're complicit.
But I did hear a woman say, if you don't understand your past, you run the risk of repeating it. And
Exactly. And
I
so
think it's
that's
important.
why we have to know this history, not to beat ourselves up, but to evolve. I
Yep.
mean, everybody has a history. Families have a history. Cities have a history. Our country has a history. So yeah, so that would be my abiding message would be raise my awareness, open my eyes, and be mindful right now in 2023. Be aware of where is evil presenting itself decked out as goodness or something. I don't know.
Sure.
But I just think we have a responsibility to stay tuned in.
Yeah.
You know,
go
then,
back to Atlanta.
Well, I went back to Atlanta, got up bright and early and went to Ebenezer Baptist Church. Senator Warnock is the pastor there, and he happened to be there. He was terrific, and it was a marvelous service. And he even pointed out, he said, "I understand we have people here from Sylvania, Ohio," that our church, of course, is in Sylvania. "Would you raise your hands?" And we were kind of flattered by that. We thought that was really thoughtful.
Right.
It was a lovely service. Afterward, we drove in our bus a couple of different places, ended up down at Centennial Square or Plaza
Park.
And then went to the last museum where I'd been before with you.
The National Center for Civil and Human Rights.
Right. And that's a powerful experience. Sitting at that lunch counter is the most terrifying experience I've ever had, because you put the earphones on and your hands on the counter and you feel like you are being attacked. Yeah. So I came away with a lifelong lesson and an awareness, and I just feel responsible to keep thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure we could talk forever about all this, but it's fun that you want to hear it. I find it interesting that you, and I'm thankful. I'm so thankful that you and your brother are not locked into some things that are counterproductive, that you're really open to learning and you haven't had those experiences. You played sports with people of color. You didn't give it a thought. Yep. But you still didn't have any best friends of color growing up, and you're a generation after me. So yeah, there's a lot to process.
Do you remember, speaking of that, do you remember any messages that you feel like you and Dad tried to convey to John and I when we were growing up as it related to race relations and everything going on?
Well, I just remember we had some neighbors on the next street, and we knew that they said things that were clearly demeaning to race. And I remember Dad, and I agreed with him, of course, but Dad found that to be not acceptable. That he wasn't going to create a fuss, but he said that isn't right. You don't think that way. And we've had family members. I mean, we know that. I remember Grandpa, John always remembers this, when we would be driving downtown to go to St. Paul's. We'd be downtown and Grandpa would say, "Be sure and lock your doors, on the car." Well, that's a racist microaggression. That's saying there could be Black people here, and why would those Black people want to get us? That is just so ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I don't ever remember, when I talk about my parents, but Daddy would have understood all of this. Daddy didn't have any difficulty working with people of color in different roles, but he did. I can remember him saying, when it came to interracial kinds of things. And I would hope if he were alive today, he would see it differently. But he used to say, you know, bluebirds go with bluebirds or robins go with robins. In other words, it's kind of a stupid thing in retrospect, but he wasn't at, you know, in 1940, or 50, he wasn't of a mind, he didn't understand interracial.
Yeah.
But if he were alive today, he would understand it, because that was the kind of person he was. And mother didn't have any, I mean, I've seen mother be incredibly kind to people in very different situations. I remember how kind she was to the janitor when we lived in an apartment when I was 9.
Yeah.
And he was Black, but mother was more of a proper person. She wouldn't have wanted me to be any place where there was anything that wasn't just proper and refined.
Right. So I just can't thank you enough for sharing all of your experience. I've heard a lot of it before, but it's great to hear it all again and in so much detail. And I hope that it's inspiring for people. But I guess the question that I would have for you as we kind of wrap this up is, so now that you're back home, and it's been a few months, what are the memories of that will stay with you about the experience?
Let me first say, Bill, that it's wonderful that you're this interested. I'm complimented that you would want me to even rehash all this. I've come away just reinforced that I have to have my antenna up, that I have to be mindful of little incidences that I might skim right over me as a white person that could be really quite inappropriate. And so that's a learning to be sensitive to what people who aren't white have to deal with. It's constantly it's a reminder of being aware and being sensitive and tuned in, because we've got to level the playing field across the board. No matter what a person's particular notion about life or what their objectives or values, we have to level the playing field. We're not trying to create a bunch of clones. I don't mean that. We just need to have people genuinely listen to each other and respect their circumstances. So I'm mindful of that. I continue to be involved in at least 2 groups of where it's a mixed group. We're getting together again on March the 4th on a Saturday with a group that's mixed Black and white, people that came together around Dialogue to Change a few years ago. And the people said, gee, we really like, these are all women, we really like each other, let's keep getting together. And so that's been a rich experience. We really pull out all the stops and talk about anything and everything. I'm stunned. One of the people in the group that I hadn't known before went to my high school, but she was about probably 6 years after me, 5 or 6 years after me. So let's say if I graduated in 54, let's say she graduated in 62 or 61. Oh, okay. And she said she wanted to be a cheerleader. And she said, and I remember our activities director, a white man, the father of a friend of mine, said there will be no brown legs next to white legs. I mean, doesn't it just boggle your mind?
Yeah.
And you get away with it. I mean, nobody batted an eye.
Yeah.
Another person said, she's quite elderly, and she said she got wonderful grades in school, and she was told she probably wasn't college material. Well, she pursued college material anyway. She became a pharmacist, and she had a lovely career. But again, she was just discounted solely on the basis of her color. And of course, most of the Black people that went to my high school came from modest family situations, because there weren't that many opportunities for people of color to have just an average income like my family would have.
Right.
So, so those things, so we talk about those things all the time.
Yeah.
We reflect back and we realize that we've made headway. I mean, we're not slinging around negative thoughts. We're saying we've made progress. We've made progress, but we're not through.
Some people would say at your age and your stage of life, why do you even care? I mean, you just, you are who you are. You've lived a wonderful life, and you don't, just keep it simple, right? Just kind of hang out and do your thing. But what do you think?
That would be so boring.
Yeah.
Because, keeping my own company, I mean, I can be with my friends that I've known for years and enjoy them, but it's much more exhilarating for me to be with people who I don't know, who have lives just like mine, but our paths hadn't crossed before. It's much more, I mean, I actually feel better when I'm around people that are different from me. And I'm learning, I mean, I can be as judgmental as the next. And I'm learning to just get over that, just throw that right out and
Sure.
just value people that are different from me, that are so interesting and so courageous and so patient. I'm struck by how the African-American race has the patience that they've had for all these years to say, we have been beaten down every possible way, whether it's the South or the North, and we're not going to throw in the towel. I think, for a lot of Blacks, the safe haven is their church. Thank God for that, because that's where they find solace and they express themselves in wonderful ways. So,
have you had the chance to share much about your civil rights tour with people, or if people asked you questions about it when you got back?
Oh yeah, and people were interested to hear about it, and but I mean, I don't force it on anybody, but when they know I've done this, then they'll say, tell me a little bit about it. I think most of the people that I know are well read, but I don't know how many people would have actually gone on this trip. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I think people are compassionate and recognize, but I think you could find a million excuses not to do it.
Sure.
And I'm really glad that I just did it. I mean, I just said I'm doing it.
Yeah. So would you have any advice for people, young or old, of just what they could do to try to be part of the solution and help rid our society of racism?
Well, we've come to the conclusion, a lot of us, that the answer is in relationships. Otis Gordon, who is my co-partner when I do Dialogue to Change, he says it boils down to relationships. You make friends one at a time. You have honest conversations. I mean, you flat out dare to say things because you just say, tell me whatever. Just have honest interactions. So relationships would probably be the first thing that we'd be advised by others. The second is to be mindful of the decisions we make that impact the greatest number of people in our society. In other words, there are things that could happen that would benefit me and might benefit you, but they might not be very beneficial for the greater good. And so to be mindful of, it's not all about me. I'm a happier person if I think that there's some fairness out there,
right,
and there's some equal opportunities. And again, we've made headway. There's no question. I mean, you look how familiar it's becoming to see Black faces in leadership roles, and you don't even think twice about it. I mean, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And if you're a Black person and you can turn on the news and see people of color who really have a role to play. I just last night saw Linda Greenfield, the UN ambassador, interviewed, and I mean, she was brilliant. And I thought, wow, Black people have to be thrilled when they see somebody like that expressing themselves. So
sure.
That's way out of my realm,
And when I think about it, I mean, I think back obviously to what you and Dad, I think, always raised us with, and that was, again, the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. But I think
Dad was best at that. That was Dad.
Yeah,
and he was a good influence on me.
Well, and then to simplify it even more, I've often said, if you put a little Black boy, a little Hispanic boy, and a little white boy, 4 years old, in a room together, they're going to become the best of friends.
Absolutely.
And it's just a shame that it seems so hard to do that as adults and have us become the best of friends. But it certainly is possible, and I think we need to try to do that, and just make sure that we don't tolerate things that we know are wrong, and that we do speak up when we have the opportunity, and that we we try to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Right. And, you know, righteous indignation is an honorable thing, righteous indignation, but to put people down as if I'm right and you're wrong isn't going to get anything done. But expressing, daring to say that just doesn't seem right. Like John will say when he's in situations where people say negative things, and you probably do the same. He'll just say, I don't agree with that, or I don't appreciate that. You know, and we need to be called out. We need to be called out when we make those mistakes, because sometimes it's just insensitive.
Right.
So yeah, I think we all have to just be mindful of what is goodness. What is goodness? My friend Sheila Otto says, let love in. That's one of her little, let love in. And I think, that's pretty good. Let love in. Am I really hot about something? Let love in. Maybe that'll settle me down.
It'll calm me down. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Mom, I
Bill.
love you so much, and I'm so thankful to have this conversation with you. I think it's an important conversation to have. So thanks for making time to do it. And
so complimented, and I'm so thankful for you. Thanks, Bill. You're the best.
I appreciate it.
Love you.